I was born in North York, Toronto.
I was born in Canada.
Oakville.
Here in Canada, in Mississauga, Ontario.
I was born in Mississauga, Canada. Yeah.
I was born in Pakistan.
I was born in Bahrain.
I was born in France.
I was born in Delhi, India.
I was born in Washington, D.C. in India.
I was born in Bahrain. I moved initially to the United States when I was around 4 years old.
I moved here in 1997, so I was 4 years old.
Around when I was 3, we moved to New York.
I came here when I was 5 years old.
And then I moved to Canada at around age 8 or 9.
I think it was the best move of my parents' life to make it to Canada.
I identify with Hinduism.
Hinduism.
And Sikhism.
I'm Hindu.
Identify with Sikhism.
Well, my dad's Hindu and my mom's Sikh.
I'm Muslim.
I'm Hindu.
I've identified with Sikhism.
I'm Muslim.
I self-identify as part of the Sikh religion.
I don't really identify with a certain religion, but growing up, my parents are Hindu, and I went to a Catholic school since I was in kindergarten. So I kind of this weird background of both Christianity and Hinduism.
I'm a practicing Muslim. I consider myself religious, I'm practicing, I guess.
My parents are kind of conservative, whereas I'm more on the liberal side of things.
It's something I chose for myself.
Because I'm not a very religious person, I associate myself as being more spiritual.
My religious views are more so spiritual than they are actually ironclad religious views.
I was religious. Now I'd say I'm more spiritual.
I think we're more spiritual in that sense, as in we look at our tenets and we look at what they mean and how we can reflect those in our lives.
You like me too?
I think the hardest thing growing up was just because my parents had just come here to a new country. Obviously they were always forced to be working.
Their education's not recognized here, so my mom works in a factory and my dad drove a limousine.
They were told that they would only be getting factory jobs and that's the only thing that they could get in this country.
I was 4 years old and I pretty much had to stay home alone in the basement.
And I always, from a young age, since we came to Canada, I was the translator, whether it was for school interviews or bank stuff my parents had to deal with, so it felt like I always had that pressure. And when you tell people that, they're like, oh, that's what your parents do?
Coming from India, he was working as an accountant in a really good firm and whatnot, and then coming here, it was really humbling because he had to start from the bottom.
I really value the fact that family was so important to them, that they came here and started a whole new life and worked so hard to build a family for their children, but that's not viewed as important as having a high paying job.
Not necessarily upper class or anything, but I think just doing better than what was expected of them was enough for them.
I think that the orientation towards family is something that's sort of ingrained in what I do, and I find that Western culture is extremely individualistic. So when you make a decision that might put you at a disadvantage, but is for the betterment of your family or your friends, and people are well, why would you do that? You should look out for yourself. I can't quite identify with that because it's just not the way that I think.
Whether or not we were born here or born there, I feel at the end of the day, it's my parents that kept culture alive in me. I'm happy they did because it gave me something to identify with. I'm different, you know what I mean? And it's good to be different.
My parents are super conservative. I think that's a part of a culture that you can't, South Asian culture, they can't escape from. So I've always felt I've had to keep justifying why I can't go out or do things that my other friends can do, but I can't.
Because in Canada, a lot of people are ignorant to the fact that there are a bunch of religions and practices across Canada, and a lot of them don't fully understand that each one is different.
I feel Sikhism isn't very well understood by the West, or even I feel a lot of people don't even know what it is or if it exists.
I don't know, just people always ask me why in your religion, why do they wear turbans? And so I always have to kind of tell people and educate them about why, because there's a lot of misconceptions that go around, right? So
there's always a disconnect between what they actually see or what they think and then what we actually are.
Then people ask why are you vegetarian, and then the whole topic shifts towards Hinduism, and then that's where it kind of gets I have to explain it.
Before I just felt so stressed at the fact that they're even communicating with me about this that I just wouldn't say anything, even if they made a mistake. I'd be yeah, whatever, and I'd just glaze over it because I didn't want to be in a situation where they would talk back about it.
They kind of seem to make jokes about it or stereotypes about it, which can sometimes be taken as negative to people who actually believe in this religion or people who actually practice this religion. So sometimes I feel like I have to justify and I defend my religion to people so they understand where we're coming from.
The more we hide in fear of who we are, the worse it'll get.
I guess it's important for me as someone in the community to like educate people.
If we portray a positive portrayal or like a true representation of what we believe our identity is, it'll be like, you know, it'll combat that.
Baby, you sure you wanna sleep next
It's not necessarily what people don't know. A lot of it is what parents don't know.
I've had to lie to my parents so many times in high school, and it sucked.
No, yeah, I've definitely had to hide stuff from my parents.
I've never had to hide almost anything with them. It's always been an open relationship.
Like, you know, drinking, partying, all that stuff in the university lifestyle.
Relationships, you can talk to my mom, she'll give you straight up advice. Alcohol, you know, I come home smashed sometimes, drunk, and they don't care.
Obviously my parents don't know about these things.
Immigrant parents, you have children who are growing up with this dissonance of trying to reconcile being westernized and also maintaining their culture. That's like a kind of a unique struggle though, because
It's really hard, like, upholding your parents' expectations of you, and then also trying to be like a normal teenager in Canada.
It's always academics for them. Like, that's the only way I could possibly fail them.
you have to deal with the expectations from your peers, the expectations from like your professional setting, and also your expectations from your family.
Sex is such a big taboo in our like South Asian culture, so it was hard for me to like learn something as big as that and not being able to convey what I learned to my parents.
It would be awkward, I think. It'd be very awkward.
It's not really something that I can explain to them and they would really understand where I'm coming from.
That's why I don't tell them about certain things for their own good.
All that's on the TV is kung fu around and in the end up.
I feel like a lot of the times we let things slip by. When you have a teacher and they're asking you, hey, is this how you pronounce your name? A lot of times we'll just let them pronounce it however they can because we can't afford to correct them because they can't pronounce it.
So my name is Ikjot, I-K-J-O-T, and it's almost pronounced wrong by everyone I meet.
A lot of my friends call me Pavin, but my name is actually pronounced Bavin.
My actual original name was Osama, and then come like grade 3 time, that's when 9/11 happened.
So my name's Jalal, but a lot of people kind of see that J and just call me Halal.
When I introduce myself to people, I say Monica instead of Monica.
I never felt personally victimized by any of the events after 9/11, but I feel like my teacher did, and then so she reached out to my mom and said, like, with what's going on right now, I think it's best if you do something about his name.
And it's funny because they'll ask my name, I'll be like, Monica, and then they see how I spell, and they're like, oh, that's such a cool way of spelling it. I'm like, that's not even how you really say it.
And then so they got my name changed.
Which is like something I've been growing up with for a long time.
And I've learned to accept that.
It's like a norm for me.
I don't think that's correct for us and, you know, for the next generation because our name is such a big part of our identity.
It actually did affect me. It affected me in a big way.
But like, it's kind of that point where I'm so like used to it, I don't even bother correcting it. I guess it's kind of sad.
I think my parents named me with that in mind, that they didn't want it to be like really, it's not such an ethnic name, and I feel kind of like sad even saying that because there's nothing wrong with that.
If I still had that name, I'm not sure I'd be in the exact same like situations I am in now. I'm not saying it's bad or it's good, it's just would have been different.
If they can learn to say Dostoevsky and Tchaikovsky, they can learn to say your name.
There are much stranger names than mine, but
You ain't the first, best believe for sure.
Because I associate as a Muslim and I associate as like someone that's brown, I mean there's a lot of stereotypes that I feel like aren't necessarily true.
And like the events after 9/11 happened, it's like it didn't change immediately, but things were slowly like turning against, like people started looking at like the Eastern Asian cultures in a negative light after that point.
It's like there's all like the Tamil Tiger terrorist thing from a while ago. So like people usually say as a joke, like you're like a Tamil Tiger, and I guess as a terrorist group you kind of don't want to associate yourself with them.
But now for sure it's like horrible, but I mean like that was when it started.
Naturally, like being the one brown guy, you get like the brunt of the jokes of like, oh, you terrorist, this and that.
Like Sunday school, people would kind of make fun of it just because it wasn't something that like every Canadian teenager does.
There was some like separation between like me and the other people in the classroom because I was the only brown kid at the time.
You can't be a sick because you cut your hair, and that really made me feel angry and embarrassed because my religion isn't just about one thing, and just because I don't do one thing doesn't mean I don't follow my religion.
Society in general has like a distorted impression of women that dress like that.
Like me, like, oh, for like Diwali, oh, you should wear like Indian clothes, or like just kind of being exoticized.
Like a lot of times women are objectified for not wearing clothes. I feel like women are objectified for wearing the clothes that they wear sometimes.
Not a lot of people are aware of country culture like right below India, so I've always been identified, well, a lot of times as Indian.
Just like, yeah, you're really fair. Aren't Tamils like super dark and kind of like unattractive? And I'm like, what? Like, that's like the most backhanded compliment that you could possibly give someone.
I didn't do too well on one of my papers and I just went to meet with the prof. But when I went to go speak with her, she just immediately looked at me and asked me if English was my first language.
A lot of people kind of assume that, I guess, based on appearances.
I was playing soccer and I was 13, and I guess the ref was also Indian, and like it looked like I had tripped someone, but I didn't actually, so he didn't call it. And one of the parents was like, "Oh, well, they were probably related. Like that's probably why he didn't call it." And I also been asked like many times if I celebrate Ramadan, and then when I say no, people follow it up with like, "Oh, are you not religious?"
Like a lot of people on my floor last year thought I was Muslim.
Because I'm brown, I get associated to be Muslim sometimes, or from living from Pakistan.
And then I have to say like that's not my religion.
There's just like a lot of misconceptions going around about Islam in general, which are hugely problematic.
In today's world, obviously, there's a lot of people that kind of perpetuate that stereotype.
And people made those assumptions about me too, so it's not only misappropriating cultural values but like a religion and applying them to someone, but that's not even my religion.
I feel like a lot of the times people don't think you're intelligent. Like they might think, oh yeah, she's good at math, but she's not someone you want to hang out with if they think you're Eastern.
They just like, they kind of look at you funny, they kind of look at you twice. It's never like, when you interact with them, they're perfectly fine, but like just the glances you catch from people, like it still exists today. So
it was like a very casual situation, so I didn't want to make it too much of like a serious like response. But at the same time, it is kind of a problematic thing that those assumptions are made.
No, I feel like I'm also guilty of that too. Like I see a certain type of Indian person and I just kind of associate like the Indian people in the GTA as that kind of person.
A lot of us have lived here for most of our lives. Like a lot of people from my generation may have been born in India but came to Canada maybe a year or so after they were born. So a lot of them have grown up in Canada. So we do know, Western society and like
growing up here for the past like 15, 16 years of my life, I feel like I've become like someone that's very different from just the typical typical brown guy.
our names are misrepresentative of, like people just generalize like, oh, they're this kind of name, they're more likely to be associated with this kind of group.
Not all brown people or all people from Pakistan or all people from India are like that, so I kind of like to differentiate myself in that sense.
We almost judge each other. It's like a harsher standard than like the average person does because we somehow don't want to come off as though like, oh well, we all eat food like this. Or like,
I won't rep a stash ever because like it just ruins everything because of the stereotypes that's been given. So like in November, like if it's pretty stereotyped if a brown guy has a stash, he's pretty roughy.
Sometimes I go to university and I see girls wearing like those turban things, and I think it looks really cool on them. And I feel like that's them kind of like taking a page from like Indian identity. But I would never wear that because I feel like it's too Indian for me.
Right, and I would like to rep it during November, but I can't because people would portray me differently.
These type of injustices happen and people don't really care because it's happening to Muslims now.
The guys here joke around a lot about it being whitewashed, right? What did that entail?
Being whitewashed is definitely a term that gets thrown around a lot these days.
It's like, oh, you don't know how to speak your language, and oh, you can't understand what I'm saying.
Oh, I don't really know why she has such an issue with you, like you're basically white, so I don't really see what the problem is.
But to the people receiving that, like, term, it's like, it's negatively received.
I just kind of went along with it, but internally I'm like, no, I'm not basically white. Like that's not, I don't identify with that at all.
They always try to defend themselves, like, no, I'm not whitewashed, I'm in touch with my culture, all that.
like I'm still brown, you know, I still carry out tradition, culture, stuff like that. Just because I don't speak the language doesn't mean much.
Me and my sisters are like really well known among all of our like family friends for being the ones who don't know how to speak Punjabi.
They might not even know that I know Urdu or like Punjabi properly because like I look whitewashed or something.
I'm not basically white. Like, my South Asian heritage and culture is a part of who I am. It's definitely like a significant enough part of who I am that someone saying that definitely did cause a very visceral reaction.
It's like people are calling you fake, and people are saying that like you're not who you really are and you're afraid to be who you really are.
And there's so many relatives that like you can't talk to who, if they don't know English.
Because I feel like with the accent that I have now, I sound funny, and then I just feel discouraged and I don't even try anymore.
Being whitewashed, like I get I get to take in a lot of different like cultures, beliefs, views, and you know, create my own opinion.
I've really learned to like take parts of other cultures and my own culture and really like take values from all of them.
I feel like you don't see too many positive representations, unfortunately, and I feel like it ranges from either like neutral to negative.
Sometimes feel neutral about it just because we're so not there.
I think it's definitely negatively skewed.
I'd say yeah, it's kind of negatively portrayed.
I mean, I definitely say it's a negative portrayal right now.
Well, it's definitely negative now. It's literally, I think, the worst it's ever been.
Muslims get a bad rap.
Like you see Islam all the time.
It's mostly like Islam.
You know, the terrorism and all this stuff.
Like, Islam is like oppressive towards women.
And you know, Indians never really get like any hardcore media pressure.
But Hinduism, like I guess you overall just get, oh, they're nice, they're happy, they do their thing, they're by themselves, just leave them alone.
Like they just don't get shit on.
You know, it's to the point of where like people just hear like the word like Muslim or like Islam, and then just immediately they have this crazy negative stigma against it.
Everything that's been going on with ISIS, that kind of thing, Muslim people are typically always associated with, you know, terrorism or like radicals or like extremists, and people have the image of Islam because of like recent terrorist like activities and whatnot, but that's a certain faction of people. There's always going to be deranged people in every type of group, every type of society, every type of culture.
For example, ISIS, they call themselves the Islamic State, but they don't practice it the way that's supposed to be. And then that's what's being broadcasted in the media, so then everyone who sees it, that's what they see as, like, and they label us the same way.
I don't identify with them, you know what I mean?
Representing our religion, but not in like an accurate way.
And if like a certain type of group is placed that way for a long time, it becomes like almost like a stigma. And I feel like maybe Muslims are the new black people in North America.
I think there's a lot of prejudice against just any shade of brown.
Like a race that people typically associate with like terrorism and things like that.
Let's take all like Indians and like people from Iraq and just call them all terrorists. Like,
And often people will sort of like jump to conclusions based on the like how like sick people look and be like assume that they're Muslim.
Pakistanis and Indians are grouped together when like no, we are separate, different identities and different cultures or different religions even.
Like being brown, you're kind of just brown. You could be brown from a whole like area of places.
They don't make that distinction between like a Pakistani person, Indian person, a Bangladeshi person. Like for them, it's just kind of all the same, and we're kind of painted with a similar brush.
Or we practice like speak different languages. Like people don't really understand that. They just see brown and just associate as like all brown people are the same.
I think it's odd when you think about being grouped as an entire category of like brown meaning one culture or one religion when there's so many different ones.
There's always going to be misunderstandings.
I think we've been like misinterpreted sometimes.
People always like often have a very like violent perception of like Indian cultures or religions that just again seem to come from like a place of ignorance, so it's not necessarily accurate at all.
For example, sometimes people think that Sikhs are violent or like violence is part of our religion just because one of our main symbols is a dagger. However, that's totally untrue. We're all about non-violence. It's just about defense.
And like the whole thing with like the turban, I think that sometimes gets like portrayed negatively in Western media.
Hugely underrepresented and misrepresented.
It kind of makes you feel underappreciated, I guess.
It's very stereotypical most of the time.
It's definitely like stereotypical.
The classic taxi driver is always Indian. The guy who owns like the convenience store is always Indian.
Like the taxi driver, the convenience store worker.
Essentially fobby, straight off the boat.
always wearing like saris or always eating curry or the heavy brown accents.
I mean, The Simpsons, Apu.
Like Apu from Simpsons.
Apu from Simpsons, and that's like a total caricature.
He's the classic Indian stereotype, right? If you were to go to India, that's what you would expect.
The media reflects identity of people who are like back home in that country, whereas there's no like accurate portrayal of people living in America or Canada.
Raj from Big Bang Theory.
Raj from like the Big Bang Theory.
And Raj.
Big Bang Theory, Raj. Like, he's a brown guy. He's got an accent. He's smart. Like, just being brown, that's like the stereotype.
When Raj does that accent, it's like, wow, this is awful.
Strong accent, the way he talks, the way he acts around, like, you know, women, like he can't even talk to them. Like, it's just the whole idea surrounding Raj is such a typical image of what Western media would present us as.
Some people do have like those strong accents, but they're definitely like using that accent for comic effect. And like while I can appreciate that on one level, I do think they're harmful.
Every time like someone draws up on it, it's always kind of like in a humor sense.
A lot of jokes are made at like the Indian person's expense.
They use the same like Indian jokes over and over and over again.
Oh, let's have a super brown character, you know, because that'll be funny. Because, you know, the Indian accent, everybody loves to make fun of it and, you know, joke around with it. It creates a big comic relief.
And I think that just kind of perpetuates like stereotypes about like South Asian culture when those characters, like those stock characters, are the only ones that kind of exist in the media.
It's meant to be like have a basis in humor.
It's not an accurate representation.
Because if you look at my parents, they don't act like that.
If they do, it's almost like having like that token brown person
A lot of brown people are represented as the same type of identity.
to add to the diversity, which is almost a little condescending because I feel like you can have an Indian character and they don't have to really follow by stereotypes.
Especially American field television. It's like, let's make the bad guys either, you know, like because it's relevant in the media, let's make it terrorists, let's make it brown people, let's make it Muslims, let's maybe throw in some Indians in there.
But at the same time, when they show a doctor in like a Western show, he might be Indian.
Those stereotypes are so reinforced in media.
They are represented in a negative light.
I wouldn't say it's completely negative, but at the same time, I think stereotypes in general are can be harmful.
A lot of portrayals of South Asian people in the media aren't relatable.
Because it's not always there, but when it is, it's not always shown in a way that's stereotypical.
It's kind of hard to say, actually.
Honestly, at this point, I can't even think of like one Indian person that's kind of on TV.
Yeah, there's really no one that I would actually identify with.
That's also a problem though, because like there's not like that many examples.
Harold and Kumar.
I guess like Kumar from like Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle.
The Kumar guy, he's pretty relaxed, laid back. He doesn't seem too religious. He's pretty outgoing, funny. I mean, that's the only one I could possibly think is a brown individual, like, relating to.
I literally can't think of anybody.
For example, Aziz Ansari.
Aziz Ansari.
Aziz Ansari.
The only name that I can think of right now is probably Aziz Ansari.
There's so few.
He represents it, but he doesn't really represent the culture. He doesn't represent like the religion. He just sort of like he's just the face of like a certain group of Eastern Asian individuals.
Like the closest would be probably the Mindy Project with Mindy Lahiri.
I feel like it's hard to find people who are like specifically like sick.
I can't think of a sick character for you.
But like Hinduism is quite similar, so I'm thinking of Mindy Kaling.
But that's just because it's like the virtue of being like a South Asian female living in the United States.
Like Mindy, the girl from New Girl, Apu, I think they're all Hindus.
Mindy Kaling is pretty popular. I think she's Indian.
Mindy Kaling being a South Asian person, having her own show, you don't see any of like the hardcore brown stereotypes in her show, so I think she's breaking free.
It's not that she leads by being an Indian woman. She kind of like there are obviously a couple jokes here and there, but I think she leads by being she's a gynecologist that lives in the States, that lives in New York, and these are all her other credentials, and that doesn't even like play as like into like the factor of who she is.
Like her culture isn't like the defining factor of who she is or her character on the show.
I feel like she represents a very Western side of it.
It would be nice to see some aspects of her South Asian like identity kind of shine through.
When you like hear her interview in real life, it's much more relatable than like the character that she plays in the media, which is interesting because she's the one who actually like writes a lot of these scripts for her shows.
I feel like there's not really that middle ground of like someone who's very into their culture but still mainstream.
Just to show people that, you know, you can be Canadian or American and still uphold your ethnic backgrounds.
It's either like you're westernized or you're very still Eastern and not assimilated at all.
There's always going to be the sense of separation between like the West and then the rest.
And that's the scary thing about it. It's just those names are so hard to like get off the top of your head, which goes to show that like, you know, media for us even, it's not like people that we kind of associate with.
That's actually a big problem because if they're not relatable, that means that they're not like accurate representations of real people.
I don't feel like I've ever really self-identified with characters who are South Asian that are on TV or in movies.
Like I don't think I've ever looked at anything that's like in a movie or on TV where I've like thought about it, like that's a legitimate concern that I've had before.
They reflect like people who are still like living in India. I don't think the media reflects like a person who has like a Canadian identity and a Tamil or a South Asian identity mixed together.
So I do think that there should be like more prominent figures that are Indian or South Asian in the media.
I didn't have any heroes or role models or current heroes or role models to look up to.
For people who are younger, I think it really makes a difference if you see somebody who you can identify with or that you understand that you're not maybe necessarily alone.
Just because like they can be such a good influence on like the youth.
It doesn't really bother me because I'm surrounded by so many people who identify with me in the same way.
I realized that I don't need that.
Kind of gives me a sense of like power to not see someone there because it's just like we and ourselves can be so powerful. We are so different and so unique from what they actually represent us as, and it's kind of like our hidden secret.
When they see me, I maybe just break that kind of stereotype of what they would have in mind.
Maybe I don't need like a hero or like a role model to look up to. Maybe I can make my own.
In a sense, having someone there, it would make us feel, you know, better represented, but in a sense, not having someone there makes us feel better empowered too.
Sing it to me.
I was definitely not I'd say overly enthusiastic about who I was.
Elementary school, when people started focusing more on like being cool or whatever.
A lot of people are really proud of their heritage. They'll be like, yo, I'm Italian, I come from a huge Italian family. It wasn't like that for me for a long time.
Trying to connect with someone else or trying to maybe say a word in Hindi here and there, but learning really early on that that's kind of frowned upon or that makes you different and that's not cool.
Our food is naturally more smelly than other types of foods, and you don't want to be that odd one out who brings us food to class, so you just generally bring a sandwich and, you know, keep quiet and eat it.
I remember for a long time I just never used to eat my lunch at school just because I know that you know, people would look at me funny.
My mom would definitely give me ethnic foods and everything, and I guess as a kid you're not as open-minded, so my friends would laugh about the seafood curry that my mom gave me.
Just rice with lentils in it.
I would be like, no, I'm not gonna eat it. If you put it for me, I'm not gonna take it.
There was a moment of insecurity because everyone else was eating different foods or westernized culture food pretty much, and I was there's a moment where I was looking down and I was like, this is actually really embarrassing.
I want sandwiches because that's what everyone else ate, and I would feel weird if I had it.
The reason why I felt embarrassed is because it wasn't normal to be eating this.
I think after that I really kind of rejected being Indian because I kind of felt embarrassed by that.
I didn't really take the pat brown lunches because I think my parents were kind of cognizant of that being potentially weird for people.
No one really said anything, but I felt it, so that's how I knew there was still that tension between the two cultures, I'd say.
The standards are based on things that Westerners came up with.
And I realized it's a lot of subconscious brainwashing from society, where in general, because other people don't give you that respect, we've forgotten to demand it for ourselves.
I also used to hate wearing braids. I hated it when my mom tried to braid my hair because I feel that was such a Indian thing and I looked too Indian.
And it sucks because it's based on Western standards.
And maybe as a kid I didn't appreciate all the little things that my parents did.
Middle school and early high school, it was kind of embarrassing because everyone else's parents spoke English real fluently.
I was kind of almost embarrassed of like what my mom dressed like.
Or I would refuse to wear like Indian looking tops because I didn't want people to think I was a ref.
Why are you trying to make me like wear like shalwar kameez? Like I don't want to, you know what I mean?
Because like I was born and raised here, and people would sometimes be like, oh, like when did you come from Punjab? And I would find that very embarrassing or like very negative because I was like, no, I'm Canadian and I was born here.
If you hide it, they think like what there might actually be something wrong about it.
And then I started kind of feeling embarrassed for feeling embarrassed.
But I realized there's nothing to hide.
Because I should be proud of my culture and my heritage, and you know, I love my food, so I should be able to eat it whenever.
Like knowing different languages is an asset.
There's a lot of aspects of our like culture that I really enjoy. I love the clothes, I love the music.
Like if I celebrated who my mom was, or like how like the things I come from, people would not only like accept it more, they'd understand it more.
Why not? Why can't I correct people when they don't say my name right?
Like I'm Pakistani or I'm Pakistani, I don't know.
Why can't I correct people when they say the name of my religion wrong?
Why not?
When I came to Toronto, and then I've been living here, and I've seen more of an influence with different Indian people, and not even just Indian, just other cultures in general, and I think that's kind of had an influence, and now I feel more comfortable with who I am.
So now at university, like you'll see me eating like butter chicken or whatever at school, and it's all good.
Like first thing anyone out on the street's gonna look at me and identify me is they're gonna be like, yo, that brown kid, you know what I mean? It's either I'm gonna own up to it and like embrace it and like reap the benefits, or I'm just gonna like hide in my own skin, like, which is ridiculous, I feel.
Just really being comfortable in your skin and being comfortable with who you are is a big thing that I've learned.
It's who you are. It's kind of like weird to be embarrassed, right?
It's just like, it's just part of who you are, so it's not really anything to be ashamed of.
The airport, like government buildings, you're kind of uneasy knowing that you're of a minority.
I like have had a lot of experiences at airports though. Like when I was, I think 12 or 13, I was detained at the Dallas airport in Texas for like 12 hours.
I've been on a plane twice in my life, and the one time I went, I got randomly searched.
I was also detained in Miami like a few years ago for like 6 hours.
Like when everyone's on the plane, we're doing a transfer. I get pulled over and they're like, oh, could we do a quick little check? It's just, I guess it's for safety, but it's definitely because I'm colored, I'm brown.
You must be part of Al-Qaeda.
It was some kind of security flag, but I'm not really sure what it was. Also, I was 12.
My dad has a turban, so we just feel like it's always random security checks go according to our family.
Whenever he goes to airports, he always gets the random check, which is just, it's like an odd thing to, I mean, I guess it could be random, but like what are the odds that every time you go you're gonna get checked?
There are situations where like that is extremely disadvantageous to people, like for example for me.
Growing up, there was a lot of times where I was like, oh man, like I wish I was white, this would be a lot easier for me.
I would go for an interview and I walk into the room and I'm, for example, the only brown guy and everyone else is Caucasian. Regardless of how accepted I feel by everyone in the room, regardless of how accepted they make me feel or what they say, there's still that mental like stigma where you look at them and you're like you and me are not the same, and I don't want that to hinder it, but I can't really bring that up.
Even now, like applying to jobs, it's like sometimes you wish you were a certain race just because you perceive that things might be easier.
You want them to know that like there's nothing different between how you and me think, because we're both raised here, not necessarily born here, but there is a chance that you might just be looking, just because of what I look like and what my name is, could disadvantage me or hinder me compared to everybody else.
For every colored person though, you know, it's kind of like you just don't feel like you're starting off the same platform.
Things like racism, things like that are always going to be present, so I mean...
I think that won't go away until like everyone is already mixed so much that everyone looks the same, they're like one tan color.
From afar.
You find a lot of Christianity in our studies and in our histories.
In art sci, there's almost this kind of implicit understanding that you almost need to kind of just know a lot about Christianity.
Like all of our courses are about like Western culture and religion.
I've never in my life signed up for a course on Christianity, but I know stories from the Bible. I know Genesis.
Like I have more of an understanding of Christianity through courses that weren't even religious courses.
Like Catholicism is like so embedded in our education.
It's definitely favoritism towards Western religions such as Christianity.
Look at school systems. You have a public school system, then you have the Roman Catholic. Like, just in the school systems itself, there's a huge like divide.
The school board is subsidized by the government unless there are private schools, which obviously isn't equal
I feel like it's very unbalanced because so many people don't know about anything about my religion or even like that it exists. And we know so much about Christianity and we're expected to know so much about Christianity.
I wouldn't say like all cultures are represented equally.
I generally did not see like any other religion kind of showing up into like the curriculum.
Like I've had a lot of teachers be like, the Bible is the most valuable thing you could read. Like it's so helpful in terms of like literature.
Our education system should be secular. Our education system should be equivalent for everyone. So if I've done all the readings for the course, I should be able to follow what you're saying.
But I mean, it's also a Christian text.
If you're teaching, you should be a little bit more understanding of the different backgrounds of every student.
To me, you the star.
Until like I was 13 or 14, I would only eat halal.
It's because I'm vegetarian that I actually will like pretty much have to eat like Indian food.
But I mean, in high school, there's so many times where you're going out with your friends and like it's hard to always just go for vegetarian options.
Being vegetarian, it's hard to get like protein from other sources.
There are definitely a lot of kosher options that are like available, and I think there's kind of like maybe like an imbalance, which could just be based on the representation at McMaster.
Which really sucks because sometimes you really want something, but they don't have the option available for you.
If someone asked me, I would say first and foremost Canadian, and then I would probably say Indian secondly.
Primarily Indian, but actually in a sense Canadian as well, because I've been in Canada my whole entire life and I've actually never been to India, so it's a mix of both.
I definitely feel like I have a blended identity.
And I feel like I only really even specify and would say that I was Indian if someone had a follow-up question, because I think when they see me they assume that, okay, but you weren't like Canadian obviously because you're not white, so what are you actually?
I identify as Canadian, but still when I think pure Canadian, I think more of like white people, so to say, or Europeans. So I also identify as being Punjabi.
I consider myself Canadian.
I'm not that brown. I'm Canadian. I'm a lot of different things.
Say I'm Canadian because like I guess that way you could say you're a whole bunch of different influences all put together.
Apart from my name and like how I look, there's nothing that really points to me being South Asian.
I'd say that I'm Indian and like westernized because I do identify with being American and Canadian.
Like I'm not really Sri Lankan because I've been there like twice in my whole life.
There's so many like different nations, ethnicities, and immigrants that came together, and that in of itself forms like a certain Canadian identity.
I am greatly influenced by the Canadian culture.
I do identify a lot with like the Indian part side of me, but since I'm grown up here in Canada, I have a lot of tendencies that are Canadian, so both.
I have an even like distribution between the two.
For me, it's kind of always been combined.
It varies. Like for example, when I'm with certain cousins who are more recently immigrated here from India, I feel much more Canadian than I do Punjabi, versus when I'm sometimes at school with a certain set of friends, I feel much more Punjabi than Canadian.
Because I can identify myself as being Canadian, that I don't even feel like maybe I have more comfort if I'm around brown people.
When I am with my Indian friends, like that cultural aspect is definitely a lot more prominent.
Since I do have a lot of brown friends, I do have a lot of people that are Muslim that are my friends, but it's not like it's been a conscious choice for me. It just kind of happened that way.
And I am very like family oriented, so I think a lot of those values that my parents have and they brought from India have stuck with me a lot. But then in like meeting people and going to school, I have a lot of those kind of Canadian values as well.
Canadian kind of varies a good widespread of just multiculturalism. Like I don't really consider myself 100% brown because I'm not religious.
Yeah, you're like a brown kid, but like you're still Canadian. You know what I mean? Like being Canadian means that there's brown kids and black kids and like white kids everywhere.
It's such a multicultural place.
Coming from a city like Mississauga, that's where I feel like something like that Western and South Asian culture is really prominent now.
Being from Mississauga and like living in Hamilton and like attending a university especially.
I mean, Master especially, we're really lucky because like the Southeastern Asian populations are so big, where it puts us at either like equal with the rest of the cultures or even in the majority.
I feel like that's what I am, right? Like a Western, South Asian kind of mixed culture.
I guess with that, I don't never really feel like people around me really put me in like a box.
I am in an environment where people are extremely accepting, and it's like a very positive, like it's just a very inclusive school. school.
It's just everyone accepts everyone for who they are and not for what they do.
Canadian culture's there, and then under that is your separate cultures, like identities of what people can like identify themselves as, but Canadian culture is still like its own separate identity.
Like, I know I'm not Canadian and I don't want to be, really.
Living away from home and school, whatnot, I do distinguish it.
There is still separation for sure, because at the end of the day, you still identify with like either or.
I think it's just the nature of the cultures. They're very much at odds with each other.
I do kind of feel like I'm like switching hats.
Departing from Canadian culture and entering your little world of like whatever culture you're part of, and then exiting.
It's not like doing something that kind of fits in with both. It's like I'll do something very Indian and then go and do something that's very Canadian, and like they don't really meet in the middle anywhere.
I would say it's like it's separate. It hasn't been infused with Canadian culture completely.
I guess I do separate the two.
It is distinguished. Yeah, definitely is.
If you try to meet in the middle, it's almost like you're trivializing one culture.
In Canada, like master, regardless of how far we are in acceptance of culture and stuff, at the end of the day, there's always like the distinction that there is like a separation that lies between.
Like when you think of Canadian culture, you do think of multiculturalism.
We like to believe that we're like this tossed salad versus like the melting pot.
But at the same time, it's still there's like a divide between what you do in your culture and what you practice at home versus like the mainstream.
But it's weird because I don't associate those things as being part of under that framework.
Trying to find a balance, it's really hard.
Moving towards fusing the two.
They're meshed for sure. Like there's a good like fusion. Like we're getting in there.
But I still see them as kind of like a separate. Like there's this like dichotomy between like being South Asian and being Canadian.
Oh, I got my eyes on you. Baby, let me tell you that you are the truth.